to another episode of Leadership Roundtable, and I'm joined today by some of my favorite leaders in the industry and probably in the world. We are today going to dive into a topic that was born from an idea that Bob had, having open conversations and the distinction between good and bad confrontations from a leadership perspective. This idea was born from the Getting to Real series. Bob brought it to my attention that he felt we needed to address this, and he was right. And so here we are. Bob, go ahead and kick us off.
Okay. My name is Bob Stonehill. I have been in manufacturing, in general management, VP of operations, and specifically in the printing industry and various other forms of printing, most recently packaging, and also plastic card in a secure environment or a credit card.
I'm currently a vice president of customer care for a final mile logistics company. My past experience has been in a number of different industries, quite honestly, but also in operations as well as sales leadership.
Thank you, Burton. Appreciate
that. Kevin Phillips. I recently graduated with my PhD in organizational leadership. I'm currently an adjunct professor at the University of Tampa, have written 3 books, and I'm currently writing a book called This Is Why I Hate My Job, because there are too many people that are unsatisfied in the workplace.
That is a fact. Thank you, sir.
Mike Tanat. I've been in the emergency services for over 36 years, including law enforcement, fire, and currently as a paramedic lieutenant, responsible for daily operations of one of our 7 stations, and running a side business doing coaching, mentoring, trying to develop the next generation of EMS leadership.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And I'll take that opportunity just to throw out, both Mike and Kevin are thought leaders on social media, and they, if you have a chance, the link to their LinkedIn channel is in the comments of this video. They are worth following and connecting with, and you can count on almost daily content from both of them, but it's certainly quality content when it does drop. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate that.
Thanks, John.
So
thank you.
I want to dive right into this, because when Bob brought this idea to me, it didn't take much thought at all. I thought he's right. We got to talk about this because we've talked a lot about communication through this whole series of Getting to Real. And, the whole premise of Getting to Real was born when, I had a leadership change, and I was with a new company after spending 15 years with my previous company, where we had really good, solid communication. I joined a new company where I was the outsider, and they were all lifers there. And what I recognized pretty quickly was, there's so much silo fighting happening just inside this one building of, just different people on, trying to stake out their turf. So I wrote the series because I felt, quite frankly, if we could get to a point where, as a team, we understood that we were there for each other, that all of our success was important to everyone, not just one department doing better than the other. That when you get to real, when you can have open and honest dialogue, there's magic that happens there. And I've cited a couple examples where in previous videos where, one of those moments of magic is, if Burton knows where my heart is, if Burton knows where my mind is, if Burton knows how I think, and Burton knows what my intentions are, I don't ever have to worry about there being a beef between Burton and I, because if something happens that Burton says, I don't understand why that happened, or that was counterproductive to our mission, what I know for sure is Burton stepping back saying, John had a reason for why he did what he did. It might have been an absolute blatant mistake, but it absolutely wasn't sabotage. And, Burton is more likely to come to me and talk to me because we got to real. We got to that moment with each other. And so this topic of good and bad confrontations, I think, plays right into that. and I've been on the receiving end of both sides of good and bad confrontations. And I think hopefully when we walk away from this, I'm hoping that we can share more examples of good confrontations so that people can take something away from this video and learn from it. But I guess I want to toss that out there to Bob to kick it off as the owner of the idea. So, Bob, what was it that prompted you to kind of bring this up and want to bring it to the group?
Well, when I was watching the video, I felt that you and the other guys were sort of skirting around that issue, and it kind of came to my mind. There are a lot of times that you don't know the type of confrontation you're going to be involved in until you're knee deep in it. Um, and I think there are many things that take place that preface that situation. Certainly, winning the trust of the people that you're with, and like you said, getting to real, they get to know, is this an ego issue, or you see something brewing and you feel that I better approach this person and have a talk with them, and you almost don't know how it's going to go until you're in it. But I think that if you approach it from an area of, maybe complimenting some of the strengths that this person has and talking around that issue before you get into the weeds, that softens it a little bit. And of course, you have to see how they're going to react to it. But anyway, that was something that popped into my head. I thought, this would be a really good subject because you need to have these confrontations, both the good ones and the bad ones, and lighten the blow on the bad ones as best you can, and do a follow up if there is a misunderstanding. But I think when you approach these, if you open yourself up to be vulnerable as a leader, that goes a long way in the receiving side of that confrontation.
I agree with that. So I think as a leader, we all want to get out there and portray the best version of ourselves or the best version of what we expect a leader to be. But, let's kind of take that step back and say, let's say you're not a leader. Let's say that you're potentially the person who's going to be the recipient of the good or the bad confrontation. Let's say you're a team member, because I think that when you have two leaders, there's absolutely going to be opportunities for bad confrontation because you've got egos involved, you've got leadership boundaries and potentially turf involved. But, Bob, what would your advice be to anybody watching this who is, potentially going to be the person who has to go and have one of those difficult conversations? How do you turn what's going to be perceived as a bad confrontation? How do you turn it into a good confrontation?
As a leader, I believe you need to listen and allow the other person. I mean, if you know this is not going to be good, you have to allow the person to vent. There are times where, I've told my folks, hey, look, if I've done something that, you took and got your feathers ruffled, bring me in my office and tell me about it. And strangely enough, I've only had that happen a few times, but I think if you reserve judgment and not act out to, get vocal right away, allow the person to go through an explanation. If they're frustrated, allow them the space to vent. We all need that, and try not to be judgmental on it and stick to the subject that you need to present, but give them the space. I think that all too often people, they become emotional, and the conversation or the confrontation tends to, travel in many different areas. So I think listening is, what I think we tend to forget is communication is listening. It's not simply talking. And you can get your point across, but allow the other person the space to vent and hear them out.
Okay. So, Burton, I want to ask you this question specifically because I know that we've shared some stories. So, let's talk about two leaders when you have to have a confrontation, and I'm going to go back to focusing on the the bad confrontations because I think that's where most people are going to find themselves. So, as you coach leaders throughout your career, and you've got a wide variety of experience from the military side all the way up through what you're doing now in the final mile side, but you've also got some retail experience. I'm curious for you, what advice do you give to leaders who have to have confrontation, and how do you coach that to the good side when you know the emotions are there? Specifically in some of the experiences that you and I have shared together when you're on hot and sweaty docks or cold and miserable docks. You got emotions running high, and look at Mike's trying to smile from his 2 weeks at the Home Depot dock. So,
Yeah.
Burton, I'm going to throw that at you, and I'm curious, because I've seen you do it, and I know you're a master at at molding a conversation. What advice would you have for two leaders when they have to have this conversation?
John, I think it starts well before this conversation comes up or is needed. And what I mean by that is, I think it's important you have to get to know the individuals way beforehand, what their likes, dislikes are, who they are, what triggers them, what motivates them, because that's what guides the whole conversation for me. Bob hit on a double handful of the things, that I think that's key. Ask questions, and not just ask, but listen closely. That's going to tell you what the root cause is. Also, with asking questions, you can guide them in the conversation to come to the same conclusion you've already got, but they came to it. And I think that eliminates some of the fear or frustration or anger that can come out of it. But then don't, Bob said it too, being vulnerable. But honesty, saying that I don't know and saying you are right, very rarely do you hear. And you can't do that if you're not listening and asking the right questions. But I think the biggest thing is get to the root cause, figure out what it is, the common goal is, and be willing to adjust and go with some of their ideas.
The word you touched on there that I think is crucial is vulnerability. And this is one of those subjects where, specifically when you've got two people who are of equal rank and structure who have to have these tough conversations, no matter what it is, a little bit of vulnerability has to play into that because both parties aren't going to walk away getting their way. There's going to have to be some compromise as well. So, from a vulnerability perspective, Mike, I want to pivot to you a little bit because when Burton mentioned that, the first thing I thought of was, man, I can't even imagine the situations that you're in where you have some confrontation that has to happen and you've got to absorb their vulnerability immediately. How do you do that in the emergency response world? Because I mean, talk about vulnerability. You've got people that are maybe relying on you for their life, or in some cases, you're looking at it going, "Yeah, this is not serious. I'm not sure why you called us. Here's a Band-Aid." How do you handle the vulnerability and confrontation?
The things that we do in our field begin with understanding that none of this is personal. When you're in retail, when you're on the docks and supply chain, whatever, you're building these daily relationships with your employees. Me as a lieutenant having to have a conversation with one of my employees, I changed my mindset and I work and call it, instead of a difficult conversation, I call it a caring conversation. Having a caring conversation because you care about the people and you want to help them and improve them, that's a different thing. But going to the emergency field, like you were asking, when it comes to patients, family members, when you're on the scene, staff members at nursing homes or in the emergency rooms that we're dealing with, at that point, the first thing is to check the ego and realize that this is not personal. It's somebody who's frustrated, somebody who has a lot going on, And sometimes, as we've been saying, listening to them and allowing them to vent and validating their feelings and getting them to understand that, yes, I know that this is a horrible situation. I know you're short-staffed tonight. I know you're not making a lot of money, and wrecking your car now is not what you need because you rely on that car to get you from A to B for work. Uh, they're frustrated, they're upset. You need to let them just do it and understand that they're in a situation with a lot on their shoulders. And by just having an open mindset, accepting them for what they are, where they are, letting them get that out, and then explaining to them that you're there to help make their day better than it is currently, and that you're moving them forward to help them. When you offer that hand, that empathy to them, they seem to de-escalate, and especially after they've let off some of that steam and you haven't taken it personally. I know a lot of situations I've watched younger providers take it personally, and you have to take them aside after the call and say, hey, listen, this guy wasn't attacking you. You just happened to be the person that showed up at the house when they were frustrated and had to deal with them. How would you feel if you were in that situation and it was your mother or your father, or if this was your child that you were dealing with, and get them to feel and to understand where they are. So in our world, we're dealing with two different situations. We're dealing with people that we're not related with, and then we're dealing with our direct reports, our subordinates that we're responsible for, and as well as in a hierarchy, we're subordinates to somebody else, and we answer to somebody else. So we know that stuff sometimes is going to roll downhill, and we need to remember that, hey, it's not personal. It's just something might be wrong with them, and then offer the people above you to say, hey, is everything all right?
Yeah, that's a great take on it, Mike. I love how you hit every different possible angle and perspective there. So, Kevin, I want to flip it over to the academic side because I know you've done research into this and you probably have a real answer versus just our opinions. So what are your thoughts here, Kevin?
Um, Kind of researching and looking at this topic as a whole, it reminded me to way back when I started in my career. And for me, it was actually a good example and a bad example within about a month time frame. And there was a senior leader, and I am just a very new person out on the block. And him and I had a very intense disagreement over email. And then I didn't want to see him, but I crossed paths with him in the hallway, and he said, Kevin, come down to my office tomorrow morning. I want to discuss what we're dealing with. And so he made me aware we are going to have a confrontation. And this is going to be, and there's a power dynamic in a lot of different areas of who is in charge of what. But he made me aware. And so I could prepare. He didn't catch me off guard, because as soon as that happens, of course, you're going to go into fight or flight. A month later, my boss and I had a confrontation as well, where I made a mistake on a document, and then he made the same mistake on another document. And I showed him, hey, we both made this mistake. And he said, why would you bring this to me unless you had everything perfect? And I said, and I wasn't prepared for it because I didn't know it was coming. And I said, well, sir, you made the same mistake. He goes, yeah, but that's not important. What's important is you made the mistake here. And I was blown away. But of course, I was defensive, partly because there's a hypocrisy element to it, but also because I wasn't prepared for the immediate aggression in my direction. And so for me, it was that good confrontation is I'm not going to attack you without you being aware. And I know with Mike, that's not always possible. But from a business standpoint, a lot of times, you know, when you're going to run into problems and when you need to address an issue. And that was so pivotal. That was 18 years ago. And both of those examples still stick with me to this day.
I think as a leader, you know, and I learned this from Sam Walton. Sam Walton, not from Sam Walton. He was dead before I got into business, but I read his book, and one of his books, he talked about how handling confrontation is the right way is so important because the easy thing for a leader to do is just replace them until it becomes the hard thing because you've got, in his world, he was going into these small towns and setting up his stores. And he said, you can only hire for a certain amount of time. And then eventually you've hired everybody in town. So you've then not only have you hired and fired everybody in town, you've hired and fired your customer base. And so, I was lucky enough to learn that lesson early on that it matters how you handle situations because you're always on stage and being able to turn that negative into a positive. So, Kevin, I'm just a little curious, and I understand if you can't answer the question for obvious reasons, but how did that relationship work out? Where you got challenged on something that you both had done.
The good confrontation, no problems ever. He and I smoothed things over and were able to work effectively. The bad confrontation is how you would expect, and that he was very much worried about himself and less about the organization, and that showed with pretty much everything he did because it was his name, and that's what's valuable. And the team broke down. There wasn't essentially quality productivity, and it was grounded from leadership. So yeah, it is as you would expect.
Yeah. Okay. So Burton, I know that you've had a couple of these experiences in just the time that I have known you. I've seen a couple, and I think you've handled them with absolute grace. At least from the outside looking in, I was never party to the actual conversations. But did you, from your perspective, the best and the worst examples of handling good and bad confrontations through your years?
Well, I was chuckling a little bit when Kevin was talking about one of his stories. It made me reflect back to uh, 2002 or 2001. I received a email that was from one of our vice presidents that was supposed to go to the president, and it was about me. And there was nothing fond said about me in this email. And so after I read it, I said it was so bad, John, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then I read it a second and the third time and realized, yeah, I don't think he's joking. So I went and sought some advice and ultimately just responded to his email, letting me know, hey, I think I received this by mistake, but now that I've seen it, would like to sit down and chat with you. The outcome of it was a little different than Kevin's. We had the best relationship in the world after that because we got to really know each other in about 20, 30 minutes time behind closed doors. Some that I think you're aware of, John. I'm very glad to hear that you may not be aware of some of the really bad examples that I had while on the dock. But honestly, I jotted a note down. I think a lot of it just comes down to the way I view things. And regardless if it's someone that's my superior, my equal, or somebody beneath me, I always try to view it as a partnership. Because at the end of the day, we're all in it together. And if you think about it from a military standpoint, if you're in a firefight, rank doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter when you're trying to survive. And that's what, quite honestly, a lot of times when you're in the rat race and fighting the fight day in and day out, that's what we're trying to do is survive and get through the day. And if I, view it as a partnership, I'm always trying to put myself in their shoes and approach it in that type of manner.
I like that, and I've seen you do that, and I will agree that is probably the most productive way to handle it. When you can walk away from a situation where you've had to have some bad confrontation, and your relationship is stronger after that.
And one other thing, John, is you don't talk about much when you're talking about leadership. It's love. And it's good and bad love, right? Your children. There's times you want to correct them because you love them. Sometimes that correction's a little more stern than others, but it comes from the heart. It comes from where it really should. And at the end of the day, if you really care about your people, you need to give them that love, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
And I think they feel that as well.
So Bob, I want to come back to you, not just because the topic was your topic, but I'm curious, from what I've learned from you, you've had a couple fixer-uppers in your career. And I'm curious from your perspective, same question that I posed to Burton. Through some of the companies where you've had to go in and fix operations or build operations really from scratch, can you give us an example of confrontation, good or bad, when you felt like it was handled exceptionally well, or potentially when you learned from a way it was handled exceptionally bad?
Yeah, while I was listening, well, actually, before you kind of went on to the others, I was jotting some things down, and then it became I became aware of when I was looking at all the notes I jotted down. I thought to myself, you know, just to digress for a half a second, I wrote this book a while ago called Constructive Culture: The Forgotten Business Metric. And although it's not a business metric, the culture is the most important aspect of the environment that you set the tone as the leader. So, these things don't happen in a vacuum. You need to properly seed the environment so that all the things that we've listed, empathy, listening, teamwork, being able to vent, so that those things can take place in an environment that's conducive to the proper way to lead. And, for me, it was always teachable moments. And, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor. Yes, I'm a certified Lean Six Sigma black belt, but I also realized that, those answers don't come from me. They come from the folks that are on the front line. I'm the facilitator, and I'm guiding them through that path of self-discovery. So, to answer your question on a bad confrontation, I brought, this was a leader of a department, and very well respected, very kind of quiet, which I think those are the dangerous ones, and brought him into my office. And I don't clearly remember the incident, that what precipitated it, but I knew he was greatly frustrated. I had my HR manager in there with me, and this guy went off and actually was wagging a finger in my face, screaming at me in my office. I took everything he had. I didn't react, which surprised the HR manager. So when he left my office, she turned to me and said, how did you not react when he was doing that? And I said, well, I don't know. I really wasn't taking it personally. And I realized he's wrong, but I'm going to let him get it out of his system. I had to, do the corporate thing, which was write him up. And he responded really well. And I had to talk with him after, he got it out of his system. And it's the empathy. Yes, it is the love from the heart, but that's something that is exhibited over time, that the folks that are on your team get to see you. They get to see you in good situations and bad situations. And, it's kind of like when you scream at an elder, and afterwards you feel really shitty about it. You feel like, oh God, why did I do that? And, you give them that opportunity to come to you and say, you know what, I was wrong in that situation. And I allowed that to happen. And, what it comes down to, John, is a realization, and I expressed this to Mike before we went on. I said, being a good leader is all about wisdom. It's the wisdom that you attain going through watching bad leaders, dealing with good leaders, being in difficult situations, and you attain this knowledge that, you call upon in these bad situations that you happen to be in. And yes, I knew this guy and I knew that wasn't really him, but I was going to give him, as long as we were in a closed environment and it wasn't out on the floor, hey, if you wanted to ream me a new one, that's your prerogative. And I was going to let him do it. But the people that worked for me would go through a brick wall. They knew that I loved them. And I knew that they loved me. And it was just a matter of, it was like dealing with your sister or your brother. It was allowing people that space to, vent and get it out of their system.
Again, caring about the people and giving them those opportunities to be able to come in. When I work either as a preceptor, as a supervisor, or even as a partner, I tell most of my people I am unlike any paramedic that you've worked with before, because everybody's always had that screamer, that yeller, or they've been on the receiving end of that power dynamic, that struggle, that ego. And I'm like, I'm not about that. And as Bob and I were talking earlier, that wisdom comes from doing this for a certain amount of time, realizing what works, what doesn't work, and going through and stumbling and making the mistakes and learning. And the Maya Angelou quote that always comes up to my mind when we talk about things like this is people will always remember how you made them feel. And 36 years later, I still remember the first time something happened to me in different instances. And as I'm watching the next generation, the newer people, the younger people coming up through these positions, I remember what it felt like being there. I remember how much I did not like feeling like that. And that's kind of what drives me these days with my business, is helping people to get to a better place sooner and having that guide that I didn't have. Working with people, giving them the opportunity to come to me and not worry about, I'm going to yell at them because they made a mistake. I'm not going to slam them because they're doing something different. And having an open mind myself, sometimes I'll go, you know what? That is a different way or a better way of doing it. Maybe I should try it. As much as when I was teaching and I was in the academia part of it for a while, I was very early on to adopt PowerPoint technology and all this stuff. But it wasn't so much so when I was back in the field. And I had one of my students teach me, like, hey, why don't you use the note app on your phone that you got with you all the time to jot the notes, as opposed to trying to find pen and paper or hoping that something's going on. And you learn from doing things and then passing that along to other people. So as Bob said, wisdom coming from time is where I think a lot of leadership helps to differentiate the bad from the good.
Yeah. So we've talked about this before, that, sometimes the key to leadership or good leadership is having access to information. So I'll put the question out there. What, from a leadership perspective, when you're trying to coach people on, good and bad confrontations, we talk about, being a leader is wisdom, having the wisdom to navigate these situations, but we have to be the ones to do it. So what is your advice?
When Bob told this story, it reminded me of probably John's favorite day this year, which was 12 days ago when Kansas City won the Super Bowl. Exactly. But it was one of the most intense confrontations you've ever seen, and that's Travis Kelce berating Andy Reid. And it was so intense and palpable, you could feel it. And Kelce went on to say that he was wrong, he was out of line, he went beyond what he should have. But the way the leader, Coach Reid, handled it was amazing, because he could have bit back, he could have pushed the guy and said, "You're not playing anymore." He could have reacted, but instead he responded. And his response was, "We're focusing on the mission." There you go. Absolutely. Um,
If you know, you know.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that really encapsulates what a leader does. He knew that if he responded, it was going to be even bigger than it was, and he needed to squash that immediately because that's not the mission. The small win the argument isn't the goal. The bigger goal is winning the Super Bowl, and that was so uh, high quality and just a unique ability to understand the situation and continue to focus on achieving the mission.
Hey, John, can I interject something on top of that? Because that was a great point.
Well, only if you're going to mention how awesome the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl was.
Well, Andy Reid, coached the Eagles, and I'm originally from Philly, so I had a little piece in that. But I think there's an aspect to some leaders that they need to be right. And this like need to be right sometimes, gee, I don't want to be shown up by someone who's a subordinate. And it's a matter of putting your ego behind and hey, maybe I can learn something here, and I'm wrong a lot. And I think when you approach somebody where you're going to be talking about maybe them being wrong about something, and it's a conversation that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, showing some vulnerability and talking about, hey, I make mistakes all the time, I think allows you to level out that playing field where you're not up here and they're down there, and making them feel that way. But there's also another important element I think that we lose along the way, which is humor. And not to the part where you're a stand-up, but I think you need to have a sense of humor. And when you're dealing with these people, not overreacting or maybe looking at the humorous side of something to diffuse a situation before it gets out of hand is important. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about seeding the environment properly. And then, something that you also talked about, which is, people are always going to view things differently. If I said something to 5 people, I'll get 7 or 8 versions back of what I said. And you might have to repeat something that you said differently so that the members of your team can absorb it in their own way. And that comes with knowing your audience and knowing the people that you work with.
Give the up and coming leaders opportunities. They have to learn from their mistakes and learn from their wins. When you see an opportunity to jump in when they're struggling and show them how to do it, being an example can sometimes help them learn, because there's 3 ways of learning, and to Bob's point, depending on how the individual learns, it's important to give them all 3 aspects so they can learn it that way. But one thing, I haven't heard mentioned tonight, and I think is key, and something that I've recently working with some of my leaders on, is slowing down long enough to explain why. Let them understand it. Sometimes when the bullets are flying, you don't have time to explain the why. It's just, you're dishing out orders and you're running 100 miles an hour. And sometimes you forget to circle back and explain the why. But when you explain the why, I think that's when future leaders truly develop the best or the most, and because they're able to see the whole picture or the big picture, and connect dots that they may not have previously been able to connect.
Mike, did you want to add anything into that part of the conversation?
Yeah. Just coattailing with Bob. Bob was talking about vulnerability. Part of that is humility and being able to say, yes, I am wrong. And as leaders, having an open enough mind to say, when you're looking at a situation and you're saying that they screwed up, well, what part of the screw up or the situation that we as the leader created? Did we short them in training? Did we short them in adequate supplies or tools to perform that function? What part of it are we? And if we understand that maybe we were wrong and that's why there was a negative or poor outcome, what could we do to improve it and remove barriers from them performing their job and their duties? Um, it's a lot of times where we're out there and we're doing, and like you said, we're just barking out orders. But if we do slow down and, as Burton was saying, give them the why, explain to them so that they understand, they're going to be a lot more adept at being able to do it. I know that when certain things were explained to me, I go, oh, okay. And especially when I was in retail and they came out with the planograms and we're doing full resets. Why the hell are we moving this? Why are we doing when somebody explained to me and took that extra 30 seconds to say, because blah A, B, and C, oh, it made sense, and then we started doing it. Um, One of the things that we do at the beginning of our shift is we check our pieces of equipment to make sure that they're functioning properly, so that when the emergency situations come up, we don't have to do it. And I always did one piece of machinery from left to right. It doesn't matter what order you necessarily did it in, as long as you tested everything. But the reason we did it left to right was when the printout came out, the printout was compacted so that it would fit on a flatbed scanner to be scanned and attached to the report. If you were going to make multiple scans and do other things, it didn't matter. But in order for it to fit and just minimize wasting paper and how many scans you have to do, if you did it this way, it worked. So explaining the why to people sometimes gives them the understanding of why we do things a certain way.
One last thing, John.
Yeah.
Setting clear expectations. I think that's key because when you do it that way, then when it comes time for that accountability conversation, it makes it very simple. It's so long as they know what the expectations were. If they don't meet them, then that second conversation is very easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's
Very
truth
true.
right there.
The only other thing I would add would be psychological safety, especially when you're dealing with the power dynamic. It's and you referenced this a little bit with the docs earlier, but just that conversation, it can scare people into not being open and honest and transparent. And so making sure there is a level of trust between the two participants really increases the success of that confrontation, disagreement, or just the conversation in general.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think that as a leader, we forget sometimes the power dynamic. But the best way to lead a team is just dilute down that power dynamic so they know that they're heard, they're seen, they're valued. And Burton, I think it goes back to what you were saying is if you explain the why, it goes so much farther.
Yeah. So, John, I think another thing that we shouldn't lose sight of, and of course, I think we might just take this for granted, but there's a lot of pressure on a leader. And from the standpoint of your supervisors or your managers that are, your subordinates, they learn your behavior. And just, maybe this isn't a good analogy or metaphor, but like children, they're going to be looking at their parents to learn from them. I worked with my dad for a number of years, and one of the things he said to me, of course, there's a lot of things that have stuck, but he said, look, I don't have time to teach you, but if you stick to me like glue, you'll learn by osmosis. And it's so true. The folks that work with you, they learn your behavior. And then what happens is their subordinates, they handle the same way you're handling them. And that, my friends, is how you foment or facilitate a constructive culture. And if you, do the things that we've all outlined here, I think the confrontations that you're going to have will be a lot easier. And I think that you grow each time you have one of these confrontations. You learn more and you add another little piece to that wisdom that you gain from being in the position of a leader.
Yep, I agree with that. Thank you for that, Bob.
Well, I think from what Burton had said earlier is creating opportunity for our people to lead. The only way they're going to grow, the only way, like Bob was saying, they're going to gain wisdom is from them making their own mistakes. And as Kevin brought up, is creating that psychologically safe environment. And starting off with clear expectations. When I have a student that comes in the beginning of the shift, I start off with the expectations that they're going to be stepping up, they're going to be leading. I'm their chauffeur. I'm just there to drive Miss Daisy around, and they're going to be responsible for everything. But I do tell them that I'm going to let you go down that rabbit hole that you think it's one diagnosis versus another one. I'm going to let you go down that path as far as you can, but I will not let you kill my patient because ultimately it comes back to me. It's still my patient, but you're not going to learn if I don't let you make the mistakes and let you go down as far as you can. So we create the opportunity by saying, okay, every situation, whether it's critical or not, you're going to take charge. You're going to take lead. We're going to show them the opportunity. Afterwards, we're going to debrief them and say, hey, what could you have done better? What could you have done differently? And we're going to teach them. We're going to make it a teachable moment. We're not going to reprimand them. We're not going to yell at them. We're also not going to let them make these mistakes because we know that it falls back on us and we're the ones that are ultimately in charge. So as leaders, we have to look at all these different aspects and tie them together so that we're able to produce these next generation of leaders.
Well, I want to thank you guys for joining me tonight on this. Quite frankly, I think this is a topic that we could talk for hours on. I know I want to thank the group for joining me, and I want to encourage anybody who's still watching to click on the links in the comments section of this. Follow these leaders. There's certainly something that you can learn here. I've learned a lot from these guys. Thank you for watching the episode. And of course, this is social media. So like, share, comment, bring your friends over. Any extra attention we can get to the channel would be helpful. And I'm just grateful for everybody who chooses to tune in.